Good morning and welcome to another episode of Charlotte County Through the Decades. This month we are on part 4, and I know the Centennial is just flying by at this point, but today part 4, the 1940s, and I thought it would be a great opportunity to talk about World War II and specifically the men of Charlotte County who died during World War II. You know, when we think about the 1940s and we think about Charlotte County, it is hard to think of another subject that would be relevant for us to talk about during this time. And we are here at the Punta Gorda Airport. Right behind me is the historic marker for the Punta Gorda Army Airfield. Right, so we have these strong World War II connections in Charlotte County, and World War II is this very transformative event for both Charlotte County and Florida in the 1940s. So I think this is a perfect time to talk about this. So what I'd like to do today is share a little bit of information with you on the 8 men of Charlotte County who died during World War II. If you are interested to know kind of how I came about this information, anyone can access this list. Now, not the detailed information that I'm going to provide, but if you go to the National Archives, there was a book published in 1946 that has every person who was killed from every state throughout the entire United States. And so if you go to Florida, it's basically broken down by county. And so Charlotte County had 8 either killed in action or died not as a result of battle, but still while in service. And just to give you some overarching numbers before we get into these men, approximately 257,000 men and women from Florida served during World War II, and approximately 3,540 Floridians will die in that conflict, which represents about 2.63 of the total number of Floridians who served. And again, if you go to that same place in the National Archives, you can just do a simple Google search, Florida casualties during World War II National Archives, and this will come up, and you can get all of this information, and you can look at other counties in Florida as well. All right, so let's begin, and I'm just going to go through each of these men and what I was able to find, and this was a very exhaustive search using Find a Grave, using Ancestry, to really try and figure out who these men were and where they served and where they died. And these will be in alphabetical order. So first we have Private Thomas Grady Berry, who was born in Georgia in 1911. And according to what I was able to find, the family came to Punta Gorda around 1929. Interestingly, and just to kind of put a frame on that, the 1920 census still had the family living in Georgia. So, but by 1929 they are down here. He was working as a hotel clerk before enlisting as a private in the medical department in 1940. I was not able to find details on his military record between his enlistment and his death, but based on what I was able to find on Find a Grave, Berry was in a medical detachment assigned to the 10th Infantry Division, who, by doing some research, in 1943 was participating in the campaign to liberate Italy. He died July 11, 1943, not from combat, so DNB, died not in battle. And so perhaps the hospital he was working in came under fire and he was killed as a result. Perhaps he was killed by falling debris. The records just don't show that. He is buried in the St. Augustine National Cemetery. The parents remain in Punta Gorda, and both of them are in Indian Springs Cemetery. So if you're able and want to check them out, you can find them. Again, last name Berry. Next, we have Private First Class Jesse Davis. He is the youngest of the 8 men. According to the 1930 census, he was born around 1929. They lived in Punta Gorda. The parents were originally from North Carolina, and the father was a fisherman here in the area. As many of you are probably aware, there were many fish companies in Punta Gorda in the 1920s and 1930s, and so Davis's family is working for one of them. I was not able to find any enlistment or draft registration information, but so a really valuable resource. So Find a Grave lists him as a private first class in the 327th Infantry, 101st Airborne, who was killed in action on September 19th, 1944 during Operation Market Garden. And those of you that have knowledge on World War II, you'll remember that the airborne units, both the 101st and the 82nd, play a very large role in these engagements. He was awarded the Purple Heart, dated the date of his death, and this was according to the National Purple Heart Hall of Honor, so you can actually go on their website and type in his name. And he is buried overseas in the Ardennes American Cemetery. And this all happened at the age of 15 years old. 15! Right, so probably had to have his parents sign off on this, either that or he ran away and joined. I know my grandfather was under the age of 18 when he enlisted in World War II, and his mother actually had to sign off on the enlistment. So that may have been the case here as well. The father also died in 1944, which is interesting, and whether that prompted young Jesse Davis to join the military, I am not sure, but perhaps. Or perhaps he just wanted to escape the fishing industry here, or escape that life. Next up, we have Tech Sergeant Pearlie Dice, born in 1913 in Cleveland. Originally from Polk County. The father was a widower according to the 1920 census, but it seemed that he had many wives and many children throughout his life. I did find his draft card dating from 1940. He was unemployed and living with his brother in Chicago at the time, interestingly enough. And he was with the 10th Infantry Regiment, 5th Division, and was killed in action on December 5th, 1944. Given the date, likely during the Battle of Metz. So if you're curious where I wasn't able to find detailed information, what I did was look at the history of World War II and try to find corresponding operations, military engagements with the deaths, and kind of match that up, and also match it with their units and find where these units were fighting. Dice is buried in Fort Ogden Cemetery, and he is actually the only soldier of the 8 who died in World War II who is buried even remotely close to Charlotte County. And so if you are curious, you can go up to Fort Ogden and find his grave. Staff Sergeant Clifford Norman Greenwood, born 1911 in Sarasota County. Oddly, I could not find any direct links to Charlotte County. He is listed on the Charlotte County list for killed and casualties, but all connections I found have him with Sarasota County, so not quite sure what's going on there. He registered for the draft in 1940 and enlisted in February 1941 at Camp Blanding, which is here in Florida. He was a sergeant in the 120th Infantry Regiment, 30th Division, who was killed in action on December 30th, 1944 during the Battle of the Bulge. And according to what I was able to find on Ancestry, he was awarded both the Purple Heart and the Bronze Star, and was buried in the Henry Chappell American Cemetery in Belgium. And his parents and brother are buried up in Minnesota, or in the Minnesota Memorial Park in Bradenton. So again, it does seem that he had stronger connections to Sarasota County, but he's listed as being part of Charlotte County. First Lieutenant Grady Allen Masters, born 1921 in Highlands County. So you see, we're getting a diverse group of people here who either were born in Charlotte County or born in surrounding areas, but then either lived here at the time of their registration. And that, I think, is where the military is basing these lists. So if you're listed as being killed from Charlotte County, that means that when you registered for the draft or when you enlisted, your information was given as Charlotte County. For Masters, according to the 1930 census, his family was living in Punta Gorda. No information from the 1940 census, but according to draft registration card, which is dated February 1942, Masters was working for an aviation company in Miami, and then later becomes a first lieutenant in the 11th Combat Cargo Squadron, 3rd Combat Cargo Group, which places him at the farthest away in one of the more remote theaters of war. He was in what's called the CBI theater, the China, Burma, India theater. So very far from home, and this is really a theater that most folks don't think of when they think of World War II. And he was killed on March 4th, 1945, when the C-47 he was on crashed because of bad weather. So again, killed while in the service, but not in battle, and sadly, just months before the war ended in Europe. Interestingly, he was originally buried in India, but then was reinterred in the Barrancas National Cemetery in Pensacola in April of 1949. So possibly the parents originally wanted to leave him overseas, or perhaps retrieving bodies was very difficult in those regions after the war, but he is up in Pensacola as of this date. Staff Sergeant Raymond Mullins, born 1917 in New Jersey, and 1945 census indicates that his father Joseph was a merchant, which could possibly explain why I found Raymond on a ship traveling from the Canal Zone in Panama back to New York. So he had a very interesting life prior to joining the service, and possibly because of the work that his father did. Not sure where he was before the war, but the enlistment record dates from 1941, showing him living in Charlotte County, still with the rank of private, and enlisting in the Air Corps in California. Overseas internment records indicate that he was assigned to the 34th Pursuit Squadron, 24th Pursuit Group. Now, I had to do some digging on this unit, and it shows that it was completely wiped out after the battle or during the Battle of the Philippines from December 1941 to May of 1942. And so again, this is kind of in those early months after Pearl Harbor, where U.S., some British, some Australian forces are fighting the Japanese, fighting a losing battle at this point against the Japanese, and this unit is completely wiped out. Some of the survivors escaped to Australia, but the majority of the men were captured by the Japanese and marched in the infamous Bataan Death March to POW camps on Luzon. So POW records, and this is how I was able to find any information on Mullins. POW records indicate that he was a staff sergeant by the time of his capture. He was listed as being held at PW Camp number 10, and the last report with him on it dates from December 14, 1944. And this day is listed in multiple places, notably the headstone inscription and internment record as his death. This record dates from December 1948, which combined with his listing on the 1945 state census with his parents suggests that his POW status was not known. And sadly, very tragically, this was not uncommon during World War II or other wars for that matter, where there is kind of this missing, unknown status, where only later do the families find out that their POW relative was actually killed. So what I found, so the official POW records state that he was executed, died in ship sinking, or a result of ship sinking, shot while attempting to escape. So what the POW records, they use kind of that general description, I think, for people that they just are not quite sure exactly what happened, but they know that they did not survive the internment. And I did in fact check this, and it does seem to be the standard listing for POWs held by the Japanese who don't survive. It does also mention that he was awarded the Purple Heart, so perhaps he was wounded and died while still in the POW camp. It really is, there's a lot of uncertainty with Mullins, unfortunately. Whatever the story is, whatever happened to him, he did die while being held as a POW, and is buried in the Manila American Cemetery, and his parents later moved to Venice, so they did leave Charlotte County. And of course we're going to have some lovely playing background noise, but bear with me here. Staff Sergeant George Rose, born 1918 in McCall, and according to the 1920 and 1930 census, George and his family lived on Gasparilla Island in Boca Grande, with his father working in the railroad industry, then the fishing industry. So again, you see these individuals, and we've seen several here, who are from working class backgrounds and are perhaps using military using enlistment and service in World War II to escape these backgrounds. It was not uncommon. My grandfather, who I mentioned earlier in the video, he very famously told me, and I will never forget it, he told me that he spent one day, he was from West Virginia, he spent one day down in the coal mines, and the next day he decided to join the military. So, you know, the fishing industry, the railroad industry, these are not easy industries. These are very labor intensive, very difficult industries, and so the military probably did have a lot of appeal for people. So Rose ultimately became a staff sergeant in the 22nd Infantry Regiment, 4th Infantry Division. My research showed that the division arrived in England in January 1944 and landed at Utah Beach as part of D-Day on June 6, 1944. They then participated in the Allen fight to take the Khotan Peninsula, including the city of Cherbourg. And based on his date of death, which was July 29th, Rose was in this fight, and it was in that fight where he was killed. And he too was awarded the Purple Heart. He is buried in the Brittany American Cemetery in France, and his mother was listed as his next of kin on the car. And our final gentleman from Charlotte County, Second Lieutenant Frederick Harold Ulrich, born 1920 in Chicago, so another Chicagoan. And by 1940, it looked like he was living with his grandparents in Ackline. But interestingly, according to his draft card, dated February 1942, his place of residence is Punta Gorda. Now, Ackline was considered part of Punta Gorda, so they may just have moved it all together. And his grandfather was listed as his point of contact, and he was currently working for the Western Electric Company. So that may have been what brought him from Chicago down to Florida. Like so many of the men that I've mentioned here, it is not known why or how he ended up choosing to join the military or even choosing the branch. But by 1943, he was a second lieutenant in the Army Air Force. Just like the men stationed here, although he was not stationed here, but same branch, stationed with a basic flying training squadron at Malden Army Airfield in Missouri. So just like the Army Airfield here in Punta Gorda, there were these Army airfields all throughout the United States where men would train before then being sent overseas. According to the Missouri death records, Ulrich was unfortunately killed July 21st, 1943 in a training accident. And, you know, we think of airplane, you know, we're at an airport today, and it's so easy for us to just get on a plane and travel today, and very safe and all of those things. World War II aircraft were still very basic if we think about them. If anybody watching has seen a World War II aircraft or has even been in one perhaps, they are very delicate and dangerous flying machines. And so training accidents, unfortunately, were not uncommon, whether in the United States or overseas. It's very interesting, and I won't go into all of it, but Frederick had a really interesting, his body had a really interesting travels. Originally he's buried in one place in Chicago, then he gets moved to another place in Chicago. So I don't know if it's that the family was divided on where they wanted him to be, but he does have a resting place and he is finally settled. But he actually is with his grandparents, who lived out their days in Florida but chose to be buried in outside Chicago, and he's buried with the grandparents, not with his parents. So maybe he just had a better relationship with them. So I know this has been a very detailed discussion today, but I do hope that this gives you a little more light into the men from Charlotte County who served and died during World War II. And if you want to know more, right behind me here, we have on our website more information about our historic markers, and this one in particular. If you go into our online collection, which I know I've mentioned several times in our videos, and I will continue to do so because it's a fantastic resource. If you go in there and you just type in Punta Gorda Army Airfield or World War II, we have a lot of images. Local historian U.S. Cleveland served in World War II and took tons of pictures of his service. So not only do we have images of the Punta Gorda Army Airfield, but we have images of U.S. Cleveland service as well. Inside the terminal, we also, and not the part that's at the gate where you have to have a ticket, but actually in the hallway that connects the terminal to baggage, Libraries and History has a small little exhibit on the Punta Gorda Army Airfield, so you can check that out while you're here, either picking someone up or waiting to board. And then I would also recommend the Florida Memory, which I think I've mentioned on here a couple times, a digital resource run by the State Archives. They have a whole virtual exhibit on Florida and World War II, which is also a great source of information. So thank you so much for joining us again today, and I will see you next month where we will be in the 1950s. So we're getting there, almost halfway there.